really nice, but they can just join the conversation. So hello everyone, thank you for coming to this session, which, oh, 1 second, I've just lost myself completely. Here's fun. Thank you for coming to join us for this session. My name is Jess. I'm just here to help make sure that everything's going smoothly. And I'll pass over to Adam in a minute. But just to start off, a couple of things to help this session run smoothly. Please use the chat function throughout to say any comments or whatever, but we're going to be having a Q&A session at the end of this session, and for that there is a Q&A function tool which you should be able to see on your dashboard, where you can submit questions, so that's what we're using to get the questions for the end of this session. I've been told there's a way to upvote questions if you want to make sure that they are asked, so if you want to have a play with that as well, that would be great. So that's what we'll be using, and at the end of this session, because we only get 50 minutes on the Zoom call because we just have so much good content throughout the week, if the conversation wants to continue on, and you still have stuff to say, we're going to be going to the coffee shop. We're going to be going to table 1, and I'll send the link in the chat at the end of this session, to make sure you all know where you're going, and Adam, our lovely speaker, is also free to join us for that, so if you have any further questions for him as well, then we will be able to do that, which will be lovely. So this is if I can find my thing. So welcome to the Avoiding Risk Before It Arrives session. And I'm now going to hand over to Adam Lindsay, who has given up his time to speak to us on this topic. He will introduce himself a lot better, but just a bit about him. He's a journalist at the BBC Domestic Radio Newsroom, and he used to be a sabbatical officer at Sussex Students' Union, and has worked with a lot of officers, staff and students in training them around the idea of media law. So I'm going to pass over to him now, and I'm going to turn my video off so you don't have to see my face anymore, but I'll pop back at the end and to ask all your questions. So over to you, Adam.
Lovely, thanks Jess. Hi everyone, hope everyone is doing well today. Let me just get the presentation up. So yeah, this is called Avoiding Risk Before It Arrives. As Jess mentioned there, I've worked with unions for quite a few years now. I've seen lots of different things that happen within student media outlets and unions as a whole, and problems are so much more difficult to solve and rectify when you're acting reactively. I think one of the biggest tools that student media groups and unions can gain is being able to see problems and make those changes before they become a problem. It's cheaper, it's more efficient, it's more effective. From all of my experience of doing that. So I'm going to run through a few types of things that you guys can be thinking about that will help you to do that in future. So here's some ground rules. You might have seen these before in the other sessions. If you've got any questions, I'll deal with them at the end. We'll have a little Q&A. Put them up in the chat and the Q&A section. Jess will deal with that, and we'll get to them at the end. If we don't have time to get to all the questions, like Jess said, I will be going to the coffee shop afterwards, so you can ask me them there. So I will stick around. I've got nothing on for the rest of the day, so I can give you as much time as you possibly want. And this session is also being recorded, just so you're aware. It's going to be shown at another similar conference later down the line, so we're just recording it. So who am I? So as Jess said there, I work at the BBC Domestic Radio Newsroom. That is the team in New Broadcasting House who do all of the news, and we do the Radio 4 6 o'clock news as well, and we do the Today programme paper reviews. But basically any national BBC radio station except for Radio 1, 5 Live and the Asian Network, who have their own bespoke teams, we do the news for all them. But actually we are doing the news for 5 Live as well at the moment because of reduced staffing. Before that, I was freelance. I worked at Sky News, Sky Sports, RTE, bit of work at TalkSport as well. These are the type of things I do in my day-to-day job. I'm a reporter on news and sports stories. I do a bit of news reading, although I find that quite dull because it's just talking to yourself in a box for hours on end. My main job is as a producer, so I'm working behind the scenes with reporters, working on scripts, editing their material, making sure that it sounds good on air. I've worked on social media and online through my career as well, and also done quite a bit of work as a news editor. Before that, long time ago, so long ago that this position doesn't even exist anymore, I was finance officer at the University of Sussex, and I've been working with Sussex and a number of other universities, student unions, since 2015, on giving help and advice on media law issues, doing some consultancy audits for some unions as well about their communication channels and departments. And I also do training as well on media law and media skills as well. So this means that I've got a background in journalism, I've got a background in professional media, but I also know the constraints and the particular challenges that unions face and that students and student journalists face as well. So we live in a very strange time. Over the course of my career, it's pretty much linked up, absolutely, that the media landscape has started to change beyond recognition. Not long before I became a journalist, we were still living in an age where there was, 5 TV channels and a few radio stations, and you took what you got. And now we're in a completely different world, and there's no signs whatsoever that that's going to change and slow down. It's not like we say, oh, we're here at this point now with Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. That's enough. We'll stop now. That's just not going to happen. We're now in a landscape, media-wise, that is going to keep changing. There's going to be stuff that happens in the future that I can't forecast or predict right now, and you can't forecast and predict right now. We've got a plethora of new platforms. But the biggest thing that's changed, I think, isn't the platforms that make content available. It's the technology we all have at our fingertips to make content. The fact that in our pockets, each one of us has a professional recording device would have been mind-blowing to me a long time ago. But my iPhone gives me everything I possibly need to be able to do my job. I can go out without any equipment. I can record interviews. I can edit material. I can take pictures. I can shoot videos. I can edit videos. I can post them online. I can do absolutely everything I want to do with this thing that absolutely everybody has in their pocket. We've seen changes as well on who controls the media. Self-publication has become a much bigger thing. Before, the only people who were journalists were journalists. The only people who were program makers were program makers. Now, everyone can be a journalist. Everyone can be a program maker. It takes nothing. You don't need any permission. You don't need any training. You can post anything you want online, and you're a content maker. That is a very, very exciting proposition. It opens up so many opportunities to engage with your members as student unions, to engage with students, to engage with wider audiences. But it also brings huge threats because everyone is now operating in the wider media, and there are rules and there are restrictions that come with that. Now, those laws are evolving at a fast pace in response. We had a new Defamation Act that was passed through Parliament in 2010. That's being slowly enacted. We're looking at privacy rules being introduced. They're talking about legislation going against social media giants at the moment, but we haven't seen anything concrete, nothing's happening, but it's an ongoing debate. As technology changes, as the platforms change, as the media landscape changes, laws need to change as well. And they're happening very fast, and they're playing catch up, but they are changing. So the things you need to do and the things you need to be aware of are constantly changing because of how quickly the media landscape is changing as well. So you put all of these together, and it means that the risks that you're facing as an organization and as people working within that organization and as student journalists in that organization, those risks are changing all the time. Anybody involved in this operation whatsoever is exposed to risk. The law doesn't make a differentiation between the fact of whether you're a professional journalist or whether you're a student journalist. It doesn't make a differentiation between whether you're a member of a comms department who's posted some stuff online or whether you're a professional program maker. The same rules apply to everyone. And that's something that you need to be aware of. It brings about risk, but also if you respond to that risk correctly, if you can see that danger, if you can plan ahead, it gives you huge opportunities too. The world is your oyster. And if you can harness this technology and these new platforms and make them safe, you're able to communicate with students and your members in a way that I could only have dreamt of when I was an officer. We faced a constant battle to try and get our message out there, to try and talk to members, to try and get feedback from members, to try and start a discussion. It was so hard. Nowadays, you can make that happen. If you address those risks and you make them safe, the possibilities are endless. So it's really important that you do that. Now, over the past 10, 15 years or so, professional media organizations have pumped unprecedented amounts of money and time into dealing with this problem. They have reorganized their whole operations. They've started again from scratch. When I was at Sky News, they literally tore everything up and rebuilt the whole organization from scratch with digital ideas and digital media at the very core of the operation. Now, other places have bolted it on the side. The BBC, where I work now, that's more of the approach there. They haven't changed how the organization fundamentally works, but they've added on new bits, they've put on new departments. And that's a huge undertaking. Those organizations have huge resources available to invest in that process. When Sky were doing their reorganization, they were running 2 channels at the same time. They were running one channel which was going out on air that everyone was seeing, and they were running a whole other channel with the same number of staff, producers, gallery staff, directors, presenters, reporters. They were running a mock channel that wasn't going out on air. So their cost doubled overnight just so they could get this right. They were throwing a hell of a lot of money at it. They had to do so many different things. The organizations have to develop new strategies, reorganize themselves structurally. They set up task force, they make new departments to deal with new platforms. You have to recruit dedicated staff. There was a huge recruitment drive at the BBC a few years ago about people who were just podcasters because they decided they needed to do a lot more with podcasts and make them work. They recruited a hell of a lot of people whose whole specialism was that. BBC hadn't done it before. And then out of the other end of it comes BBC Sounds, which is hugely podcast orientated. But they needed to recruit a hell of a lot of people to get that expertise into the organization because it wasn't there before. They have ongoing legal training for all staff and in-house legal support. So anyone who deals with publishing in any way will have a legal refresher every single year. That's the journalists, that's the producers. But also, we have the benefit that we have a lawyer sitting in the newsroom at the BBC. I know where their desk is. If I have a problem with something or I have a question with something, I literally walk over this person's desk, 30 seconds time, there is a trained lawyer there to tell me what I can and can't do. In the middle of the night, they're on call. I can call them up, 3 o'clock in the morning, they'll give me an answer. That's obviously a huge luxury that student unions aren't going to be able to enjoy. All of this stuff costs a lot of money. They've had to do it, they've had to reorganize, and they've thrown a hell of a lot of money at it. And it's not just media organizations who've done it. Other large companies who deal with the media or self-publish in any way, which is most now, because every single company has a Twitter feed, every single company has a Facebook feed, every single company has an Instagram feed and a TikTok feed and whatever. So large companies are now content creators, and they've also invested heavily in media and legal training and reorganization in response to this changing landscape. They've seen the opportunities and they've moved to deal with it. Now, obviously, student unions don't benefit from those luxuries. You do not have multi-million pound budgets. You do not have the ability to have a lawyer sat in your organization 24/7. But you still have a stake in the media landscape. The law makes it very, very clear that everyone gets treated equally, regardless of your status. If you do something wrong and you're sued for defamation or you're prosecuted for contempt of court or something like that, you can't get up in the dock in court and say, well, we're not the BBC, we're not Sky News. The law makes it very clear that everybody is held to the same standards, and that ignorance is not a defense. So that creates a huge risk and a huge problem for organizations like yours. You're also, adding to that, vulnerable to other risks which are unique to your sector. The first one is the rising expectations of student journalists and some of your officers as well. That availability of that technology in your phone, in your pocket, has changed the expectations of your members and your officers and your student journalists. We are brought up now in a world where anyone can publish anything whenever they want. So if you create situations where you're having to say to your student journalists and officers, you can't put that up online, you can't publish that, no, we can't do that, you're going to get kickback, because that's not the world that they are exposed to. So how do you reconcile that? That's one unique risk that you have. It's now easier than ever to publish high quality material quickly and potentially reach a wider audience than ever previously possible. But if you don't do that without adequate planning or doing analysis of the risks that are involved, that can cause a huge risk of reputational damage or legal problems. Just taking a gung-ho approach of, we'll let this happen, we'll deal with any problems when they happen down the line, I think is hugely risky. It's more expensive, it's more troublesome, and especially when we come out of the other side of what we're going through at the moment, and you look at the prospect of there being less money around, potentially there having to be job cuts in unions and stuff like that, that's going to become an even bigger issue. You don't want to be dealing with these problems as problems. You want to be looking ahead to potential problems and stopping them being problems at all. If you get it right, you can utilize these new tools, you can utilize social media, you can utilize the ease of creating content, engaging with your membership in the wider world so much more effectively, and make yourself safe, and give your student media outlets a much more healthy, professional experience to exist within. If anyone is going from student media into professional media afterwards, if you are using these outlets as a way of giving your members skills and a step forward on a potential career, they're going to have to deal with these things later down the line anyway. So you can set up situations that will give them skills and make them more employable in the future, if that's something that your members want. So there's the big scary bit. What can you do though about all of this stuff? How can you see the risk before it arrives? How can you prepare for problems that you don't even know are coming? Well, that's the first issue. You need to try and identify potential problems and issues before they exist, rather than taking a reactionary approach and dealing with a problem after it exists. Now, the best way of doing this isn't to be too specific. We have very specific contingency plans in the media, but again, we have the resources to make them useful. So, for example, about once a year, every journalist at the BBC has to rehearse what happens when the Queen dies. We do a mock programme. Again, doesn't go out on air. All types of safeguards are made to make sure that it doesn't accidentally go out on air. But we practice it, we do it. That's a very specific situation, because we need to know that we're going to respond to that situation perfectly when it happens. But that's a luxury that we have. What I would advise to you is actually just looking at it in a more general way. There's no point saying, what do we do if the president tweets a defamatory comment about the vice chancellor? That's very, very specific. Think about it in more broad brushstrokes. What do you do if somebody threatens legal action against some content that's been posted on a union social media platform? That's the type of level of detail that you want to be thinking of. That means that you're going to be encapsulating more things into these thoughts and processes that you're putting together. You also need to create or review, if you already have them, your structures. Any good communications and student media landscape will have structures to it. The less structure you have, the less accountability you have, the more risky and dangerous it's going to be. I would strongly recommend having very clear structures of, this person needs to authorize publication for this. This person's allowed to do this. If we're going to do this, then this person needs to authorize. You know, the more stuff you have written down in paper very clearly about who can authorize what, the better. Alongside that, devising clear policies will really help you to make this an effective strategy. I would recommend running a full risk analysis on student media outlets and online social media publishing as well, if you haven't done that before. As I said right at the start, I've done a couple of these type of things for unions around the country. Full audits of how they work, how their publishing works, how social media and student media outlets work. And they throw up a hell of a lot of stuff that people aren't even aware of. When you really strip everything back and think everything through and run a full risk analysis and audit of these things will come up that you're not aware of. Becoming aware of it means that you can then create a structure, you can create a policy, you can create something to mitigate against it. But the first thing you've got to do is identify the problem that could potentially be there in the first place. And in my opinion, the only way of really doing that is to run a risk analysis. I would strongly advise, if you are going to do this as well, to get students and student media outlets involved in the process from the start as well. If it's a student-led process, if they're involved, if they're having their views heard and responded to, they're so much less likely to kick back against it. And that is one of the biggest risks that you have as unions, kickback from outlets and student journalists individually. All of the biggest problems I've dealt with in student media are by unions telling outlets that they can't do something, and that making the outlets angry, and the outlets just going and doing it anyway, and then having to deal with the mess afterwards. If you can make the process something that students and outlets are involved in from the start, and they feel that they've been heard, they're much less likely later down the line to kick back against anything that this process creates, because they've got a stake in it. This is integral, absolutely integral, and I hope that one day I'm going to be able to stop saying it in talks to people like yourselves. Student media law training is a lifesaver for so many people. It's now a prerequisite for quite a lot of unions through their insurance policies. But if for those of you who don't have it, even if you don't need to because your insurance policy's told you, it can save so much hassle and potential cost trying to deal with problems after they've happened if you have ongoing training every single year. The more people involved in that training, the cheaper it becomes, because I don't know what other trainers do, but I charge a day rate. You get more people in that room, I'm becoming a more affordable person. Again, if we look at the employability as well for your members, if people are student journalists, this is an absolute integral thing to becoming a journalist. You will not get a job anywhere if you don't know media law. So you're giving your members something that could be of benefit to them if they want to go into professional media later down the line. But I wouldn't just stop at outlets in relation to this. I think staff need to be trained. I think officers need to be trained. I do officer training on media skills for giving interviews. I do a bit of media law training within that because it's important that they're getting some training on this as well. And staff as well, anyone involved in publishing material, it's important that they know what they can and can't publish, how they can and can't publish it, to make sure they don't get it wrong. Having ongoing media law advice and support is useful as well. That's another service that I offer, and I know a lot of other people offer. Just being able to, you know, some unions like me to authorize things that they think might be a bit suspect. So I read actual articles and say, no, that's fine, or I think there's an issue with this, I'd recommend changing that. Some places have me in an integral part in their system. Other people just call me up as and when they want. But it means that if there is a problem, you can just have that double check. You can have that support to make sure you're making the right decision. And I just touched on this before, but having media skills training as well as media law training for your officers and any staff who do interviews with the media, that's really useful as well. Reputational damage that can be done to your organization by an officer giving an awful interview or saying something they shouldn't in an interview with a mainstream media publication could be huge. So again, you're trying to mitigate that risk before it occurs. Here's a really important one for unions as a whole and the industry as a whole. Money is an issue. Budgets are an issue. Everyone is on a tight shoestring, and that's going to just get worse over the coming months, I think. One way that you can make all of this work for you is to work together and to share the knowledge that you have. There's numerous ways you can do this. Stuff like today, these type of events, the coffee shop we're going to go into afterwards and keep chatting about this. That's sharing knowledge. That's great. Develop those contacts with other unions' communications teams, other unions' student media teams, and share that knowledge. Get a dialogue going, get the contacts going, and help each other by doing that. You can also think about how, you know, if you're struggling to be able to pay somebody like me to come in and give you media law training or give you media law advice, you know, one thing you can do is work with other unions to make that cheaper. One union called me up a couple of years ago saying they wanted media law training, but they couldn't afford it at my day rate. So I said, well, is there anyone nearby that you know who might want it as well? And there was a university in the next city over. So somebody from that union called that other union, said, do you want to go halves on this media law training? And then they could afford it. They were paying half price to get exactly the same content because they pieced together, and we did the training that way. So you can make those relationships work for you and get the type of help and support you need by doing that. So let's drill down into a few of those a little bit more with the remaining time we've got. So structures and policies is a really important one. You need to think ahead and think, well, what do we do if this happens? What do we do if this happens? What happens if we want to publish this type of thing? What needs to happen? Having everything set down on paper and formalized makes it so much easier to deal with than a more haphazard reorganisation. So I would ensure that any part of your union who deals with the media, online publishing, social media, or student media outlets are reviewed, and you make sure that they're fit for purpose. Any ambiguity or lack of clarity in the responsibilities of people in those processes, or the correct processes that should be carried out for something to be published, can have a huge impact. You need to create clear paths of accountability and authority in these processes. And you also need to make sure that everyone involved in those areas is aware of those paths and who is responsible for authorizing things. That is a big problem that I found at some unions, that you do have the structures and policies sometimes, but nobody's bothered telling the student journalists what those are meant to be. So one day, someone from the union said, you can't do that, that's against our policy, but no one's told the student in the first place. So you need to make sure that you're disseminating that information, that it becomes absolutely central to the culture of your organization, how these departments work, how student media outlets work. I would create dedicated new policies as well, if you don't already have them, on social media, external engagement, so by that I mean dealing with the mainstream media, student media management and oversight, and training. If you don't have dedicated policies on those things, get them together. They are huge risks to your organization if you don't. So I talked a bit before about doing risk analysis of your media outlets. And this is something that every single professional media organization does and has inbuilt into the very core of how they operate. They have guidelines and protocols on how to deal with every eventuality. And the basis behind all that is risk analysis. Doing the same for your student media outlets significantly reduces the risks that you expose yourself to. It is as simple as that. And if you can get students and outlets involved from the outset and make this a student-driven approach, that will ensure they buy into the entire process. I keep saying it, but student media outlets and journalists kicking back against being told that they can't do something is the biggest risk that you face in this type of arena. But getting them on side, getting them to buy into the process solves all of those problems straight away. You've got to get over that it's not a matter of censorship. We have very specific defamation and media law rules in our country that are slightly draconian. But there is pretty much a way of saying everything that you want to say if you do it in a very specific way. But to do it in that way, you need to be aware of that being the way that you're allowed to do it. Giving student journalists knowledge of how they have to say things, how they have to do things, and giving them the knowledge of why they have to do it by giving them the media law training actually gives them the tools to do much more and say what they want to say and do it with the standards and the quality they want to do it with, whilst also remaining safe as well. I don't see it as a matter of censorship. I see it as a matter of giving people a voice, giving them the processes to do things safely, giving them the knowledge to know what they can do. That's giving them a voice, it's not censoring them. So if you are doing this risk analysis, you need to cover every eventuality you can think of. Go into as much detail as you can in that, but don't get too bogged down in real nitpicky. Well, what do we do in this exact situation here? Think about the type of things that have been issues in the past. Try and think about things that haven't been issues that could potentially be issues and run the risk analysis on that. Then respond by setting out clear editorial processes and fail-safes for potentially risky material to ensure they're not published if it doesn't meet agreed standards. So I said, you know, there are some unions that I'm very involved in their editorial checking procedures. Those ones generally will have somebody employed by the union, a student a lot of the time, sometimes a law student, sometimes not, whose job it is to check everything in the student paper before it gets published. If that student or that person doing that job sees anything that raises a bit of a flag, you know, a story about a sexual assault or something like that, or a crime, or somebody making an attack on somebody in an article, those type of things, then that gets flagged up and that gets sent to me, and I'll then read it and I'll go, no, this is totally fine, this doesn't breach any laws, go ahead and publish. Or I send back something and say, no, this is problematic, this paragraph, you need to change this, and then that needs to be changed before it's published. So that's an example of one clear editorial process that a union can have together to make sure that nothing goes out that isn't safe to go out. That's not the only way. There's numerous ways you can structure it to make it work for you. And people like me can give you advice on the best ways of doing that to meet your specific needs. But you can set out a very, very simple editorial process and structure which significantly increases how safe you are as an organisation. It would set out the responsibilities and extent of authority for everyone involved in the operation. It's also important that you do spot checks as well. You can put together a policy, but if the policy isn't being followed, then what's the point of it? So I would say if you do a risk analysis, you do put together these editorial processes going forward, just do little spot checks and make sure that they are being followed. If you already have editorial processes, then do a spot check, because you don't know if they're being followed or not if you're not checking up on it. There should also be implanted in the whole process reviews. They're essential. It should be a constantly evolving process. There should be two types of review I would recommend. Any time that you need to call upon the editorial processes, then after you've dealt with that issue, I would then review the whole thing. It's the best time to do it. You could say, right, we had an issue here, we enacted this policy. Did it work? If it didn't work, what did we do wrong that meant that it didn't work? Do we need to change the policy to make sure it works again in future? By doing that, you're protecting yourself hugely. If any legal action's taken against you, you can be saying, we have documentary evidence here that we reviewed our processes, we refined them, we made them better. It's a constant process. That is mitigation. That will help you if the worst happens. I would also, on top of that, just recommend reviewing the whole process periodically, say maybe every 2-3 years. Just have a look at it. Is it still fit for purpose? That media landscape's changing. The whole world is changing. So if you did something 2-3 years ago, it might not be relevant anymore. The world might have moved on. So it's important that you keep going back to it and look at it again. This sounds like a sales pitch, but media law training is hugely important. As a bare minimum, I would recommend that the editors of your student media outlets, not just the main editor, but the section editors, and any staff responsible for authorizing the publication of their material should receive media law training once a year. As I said, the law is changing very, very rapidly. It's changing at its fastest ever pace. If you want to be really belts and braces about this, get as many student journalists as possible, especially those who are working on news articles, to be involved as well. The more media law knowledge you have in your student media outlets, the safer you're going to be. If you're trying to save money in this area, it's a huge false economy. Paying a little bit less for training could cost you tens of thousands of pounds by somebody getting something wrong. Don't cut corners and try and save money here. Try and find training from a working journalist or somebody who has retired not too long ago, preferably working at a large media organisation. That ensures the knowledge is as good as possible. As we said, the law is constantly changing. We have to have refresher sessions once a year. So if someone's been retired for 5-6 years or hasn't worked as a journalist for 5 or 6 years, their knowledge might not be absolutely up to date. Even if it is up to date because they've read up on it and they've made sure it's up to date, they might not have an understanding of how it's working in practice in a media organisation. So it's not essential, but my advice to you, if you were looking for someone to to be a media law trainer, use a working journalist at a big media organisation. So another thing you can do is media law advice and support. It's a good fail-safe measure. You can get this type of thing ad hoc. I just charge per hour. I run up a bill and an invoice once every 6 months. It ends up being very, very small amounts of money. But it can range from anything from checking if an article's safe to giving advice to a chief exec on somebody threatening legal action, or that an officer has just said something on Twitter that they shouldn't have. What should we do? There's a huge scope to it. It can become embedded in your editorial processes if you want to put that in place and help you make the right decisions on an ongoing basis, or it can be a bit more ad hoc. But anything of this type helps to reassert and ingrain. Any media law training that you have, it allows staff, officers and students to develop that knowledge further. When I'm giving my feedback, I do try and, I don't just say, no, that's not okay, you need to do this. I try and give an idea of why. I try and explain it so people can go, oh yeah, you did talk about that in the training, and now it makes even more sense. So you're actually making the training better value by taking something like this on as well. As I said before, you can get pro rata arrangements. You don't need to pay a retainer. You pay people by the minute, basically, and it makes it very affordable. I don't think I've ever charged a union more than £100 a year for the media law advice they've taken from me. Media skills training. Again, the media law training is absolutely essential for the online publishing. But media skills training is also very, very important. Officers and unions are increasingly being asked to comment on issues in the wider media on all types of platforms. That incurs a risk. If someone says something they don't mean to, or they haven't thought through properly, or is legally problematic, it's out there in the wider world and you don't have any control over it once it's out there. There's only a certain amount of damage limitation you can personally do. So it's best to make sure that people are trained on how to give an interview and what to say and how to say it before they give the interview. We're a bit short on time, so I'm just running through a few points that aren't as important, a little bit quicker. I would say that people who speak to the media on behalf of your union need to be aware of the very basics of media and defamation law as well. I think that's a duty of care issue. If you are putting people up for interview on behalf of the union, you need to make sure that they are aware of the very basics, because they're liable to, not just the union, they can be prosecuted if they do something wrong. So I'd say that's a duty of care issue, that they need to have at least the very, very basics of media law before you put anyone forward. This is useful to know as well when we talk about trying to engage with those new technologies, those ability to talk to much bigger and wider audiences. Everyone can make content off their own back, but if you get some training on how to make very engaging, good content from people who are involved in the media, that is just going to be more effective. It can really help to boost your union's image, get your message out there, and engage with more members. And I think this is the final one that we talked about before. It's extremely unlikely that you're going to be able to do things in a way that the mainstream media organizations can. You need to be smart, think ahead to be able to do all these things that I'm telling you. Everyone can learn and improve their processes that they always have. That's the first thing that you need to have in your head. Share best practice. It's amazing the amount of times where I say, oh, they do this at Oxford, they do this at Kent, and people are like, oh, never thought of that. It's me being the conduit here, someone who's outside the union movement. If you guys talk to each other and you share your best practice, you can find so many ideas. Every single union I go to, I find a new thing that they're doing with student media or communications that I haven't seen anywhere else, and I think it's great. So share that stuff, make your whole sector stronger by doing it. If you need to, pool resources to make training and advice more affordable. You really need to get the training, so think about how you can make that happen if you can't afford to do it. I would also, maybe if you were interested, think about creating a wider discussion about whether student media as a whole would benefit from establishing regulation or things like that. Anyone can be a regulator now. You can apply to the government and become an authorized regulator. Regulation brings about a more professional way of working. It makes your student outlets and your student journalists better and better equipped for the professional media landscape if that's where they want to go later down the line. I would think that creating a student union media regulator would be a beneficial thing, but that's way out of my hands. But it's the type of thing you guys might be able to talk about between yourselves. So, in conclusion, the media is undeniably a riskier place the uninitiated or unprepared to operate in. But if you take the right decisions, you put the right processes in place, you get the right training, you get the right advice, you get the right support, you can prosper in this new landscape. You can utilize new technology at your disposal. It will help your union, it will help your members, it will help your officers. You can be well placed to adapt to new developments. If you have processes already in place, it's so much easier just to tweak them and be nimble. If you have to start from scratch, that's a whole huge undertaking. But get those things in place now, and anything that changes in the future, it's a lot easier just to tweak it. You've also got to think about protecting your union from the threat of costly legal action, even if you have insurance cover against defamation. If you invoke that insurance cover, your premiums are going to go up in future. That's less money that you can spend on your members and your students and helping their day-to-day lives directly. Put those protections in place, get the training you need, and it saves you from that threat of costly legal action. And that is a really, really important thing that you can do. You can also create a great training ground for any student who wants to work in the media after graduation. Every single journalist I know, we all did student radio, we all did student newspapers. It's how we learned our craft. This is a training ground for the wider media. The more training, the more knowledge, and the more skills you can give your members and students, the greater service you're doing to them. So that's about it. Don't be afraid. Don't. I know there was a lot of scary language in there, but this is an opportunity, not a threat. The world is a risky place. It's getting more risky. It's the way it happens. But you can take very, very simple measures. You can reduce that risk hugely. There's my details. If anyone wants to get in contact with me anytime, then do please get in contact. But as for now, that's the end of the talk.
Great. Thank you, Adam, so much for that. It was really interesting. And as an ex-officer who kind of avoided media at her time, because someone else had to look after it, it was actually really interesting to hear all about it. So thank you very much. What I've done is I've taken a photo of all the questions in the Q&A function. Thank you so much for people who've submitted those. And what we're going to do is we're going to move over to the coffee shop. The link is now in the chat. And we will ask those questions there, and if people have more questions, we can continue to answer questions and keep this discussion alive. So that is what we will be doing. So the next session can also take place on this Zoom call. So thank you very much, Adam. I will see you in the coffee shop, and to everyone else, thank you so much for attending. I hope you found this useful, and I hope to see you in the coffee shop too. The link's in the chat, but if you're going directly, it's there.